Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC full-year results investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your question in the box below and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll. I'd like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded, and I'd now like to hand over to Adam Hill, CEO, and Matthew Hall, CFO. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm joined by my colleague, Matthew Hall, the Chief Finance Officer at ONCIMMUNE, and myself, I'm the Chief Executive at ONCIMMUNE. So we're presenting today the financial year 2020 full results and progress update. Many of you who have heard me speak before will recognise that our platform technology, proprietary technology in the field of autoantibodies, we exploit in two ways. One, through the development of a pharma services business, and two, through the productization of that platform. The ImmunoInsights pharma business, which we acquired from Protogen Diagnostics in March 2019, has continued to develop apace. We have unlocked the potential of that platform through accelerating the business development pipeline and bringing those long lead cycle deals to fruition. The first of which we signed and started delivering in February of this calendar year. And since, we have gone on to sign another 5 pharma deals. The Roche group of companies, Roche Pharma and Genentech, form a substantial part of the work that we have undertaken over the last couple of months. Now, that pharma services business, whilst focused primarily on our heritage in oncology, has started to expand out into other diseases in which therapies can modulate the immune system, such as autoimmune disease and infectious diseases. And most latterly, we have received funding from the British government to collaborate with the Medicines Discovery Catapult to develop a tool for COVID-19 that will add to the number of tools that we've developed in the company. On the product side of our business, our early CDT lung asset in the year has made significant strides. Not only were we able to divest our US entity and sell the exclusive right to that product for use in nodules to Biodesix, a US domiciled lung cancer focused diagnostic company, but we were also able to work with a pharmaceutical company to identify patients earlier in the disease process so that their drugs could have a better effect. Early CDT lung is now sold into 24 countries through 19 relationships. And in March of this year, we were delighted to see a very, very positive MedTech innovation briefing from NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence in the United Kingdom, supporting the use of early CDT lung, and hope that that acts as a prelude to full guidance from NICE. It would be very unusual for them to provide full guidance around a diagnostic, and so I think we would be breaking ground if we were able to announce that. Finally, early CDT lung was, as many of you are aware, subject of the largest randomized study of a blood biomarker for cancer detection in the world, and that study reported out, firstly, in September of 2019 on the President's Podium of World Lung, but more importantly, was peer-reviewed and published in the European Respiratory Journal earlier this summer. The 2020 summary and outlook is one that is categorized categorized through the step-changing growth that we have experienced over this period of time. Certainly, the last 6, if not 9 months have seen a substantial number of contracts landed, as I've described, in the pharma services business, which we are currently delivering. That pipeline of service contracts continues to grow and has been further diversified by the investment that the British government made in the development of our Navigate infectious disease panel most recently. The first contract with that panel has been signed, and we are in the process of delivering that work for Cedars-Sinai. Matthew, can I hand over to you to talk through the finances? You're on mute.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone. So reporting for the financial year ended 31st of May 2020 really was a year of quite some change in the history of ONCIMMUNE. It's the first full year of the 3-year strategy, which was put in place towards the end of 2018. And in that year, we recorded contracted invoiced revenue of £1.2 million against a bit under £250,000 for 2019. And just to give you some sense of the composition of that, included in that invoiced revenue is the first payment under the second Roche contract of just over £500,000, and that was invoiced towards the end of the financial year and paid in accordance with the terms a month later. Administrative expenses, it's worth just remembering that at the half-year results, we talked about the change which we were putting through ONCIMMUNE, the change that substantially reshaped the business from a business that was largely a single asset diagnostic business to one that sits here today as a complex, much diversified business with operations in the UK and Germany. In the first half of that year, we acquired Protogen Diagnostics out of Germany. We integrated it within the group. We sold the laboratory in Kansas in the United States, and importantly signed the exciting commercialization deal with Biodesics. We did a deal with IPF for €8.5 million loan into the business. And so there were costs associated with the first half of reshaping the business, including bringing on board new and really important people that were there to drive the commercial future of our business. And so the first half versus the second half weighting on cost is really quite stark. In the second half, we put in place the cost reduction program, which we talked about in the interims, and there we managed to extract really quite considerable levels of cost out of the business, such that by the time we had reached the end of the financial year, our run rate of costs on a monthly basis had reached a point, an historic low, certainly in the time that I've been with the company. And we've managed to maintain that degree of cost constraint right through to the present time, which is excellent. A characteristic of ONCIMMUNE in the past and currently is our continued focus on research and development, and you can see there that we continue to focus heavily on research and development, primarily on our products, improvement of existing products, but also in fact to bring through new products that are in our pipeline. And then lastly, at the end of the year, we closed with 4.2 million of cash in the bank, and taking into account that debt, which I referred to previously, net debt position was 3.4 million. And post year end, and in order to be able to, and we'll talk more about our relationships with our pharmaceutical companies, which are terribly exciting, but in order to be able to sit alongside these extremely large companies, as we become more and more involved with them, it does necessitate us passing through further layers of outsourced due diligence. So in order to be able to meet that due diligence profile, we took on board an additional 6 million loan from IPF, and we've drawn 3 of that down. The remainder is available for us to draw down should we need it by June of next year. Adam, I think I'll hand back to you then on that basis.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So I'd like to spend, ladies and gentlemen, 10 minutes walking you through the company. I see that there's some excellent questions coming in, and hopefully I'll be able to answer many of those questions as we run through the next few slides. At its very core, ONCIMMUNE looks to exploit the biomarker class autoantibodies that are largely proprietary to us, certainly in the in cancer and early detection, that we have focused exclusively on throughout our entire history, having spun out of Nottingham University. Over 200 patents, over 100 peer-reviewed papers and presentations, and importantly, a scientific team. There are 55 people in the company. Approximately 28, maybe 30 of those work within that scientific team that represent the brain trust that allows us to pivot intellectual property into product. In our scientific team, at last count, we had 9 PhDs for those that are interested. In pivoting that intellectual property into supporting our services through tools or product through our early CDT product line, we've been able to generate a substantial forward order book. On the service side of our business, there's approximately £14 million of value that currently is unconverted and we are working on as we speak. Equally, on the product side of the business, there's approximately an order book of £42 million of minimum sales commitments across the 24 countries in which we sell through 19 relationships. Fundamentally, whether it's a service or product, we receive blood samples and analyze those blood samples to provide a result to the clinician or indeed the pharmaceutical customer, if it's our product offering we're talking about. We've delivered more than 305,000 tests into the market, which has enabled us to develop a very significant biobank and data resource that I'll come back onto in a couple of moments. So what differentiates us? Well, look, I spent a little time very late at night on last Friday talking to a very well-funded biotech on the west coast of the US and asked just this question in anticipation of this presentation. And what I received was a very clear answer, and that is that we went to every CRO we could think of on the west coast and the east coast of the US and asked if they could help us develop an autoantibody based panel for our work, and the answer was no. So quite frankly, we've searched globally for an organization that can go from a blank sheet of paper to a product in the market developing evidence of its utility, and you're the only organization that does this. So whilst niche, this biomarker class is particularly important, and as a result, we do position ourselves as a leader in immune biomarkers, and our vision is very much to enable personalized, data-driven clinical decisions across the care continuum. We've proven the value of these biomarkers and our technology platform in early cancer detection, and importantly in stratification of patients more recently with our pharma customers. This biomarker class we have taken, in the case of lung, to the highest level of evidence of any blood-based biomarker for cancer detection in the world through the ECLS study, co-funded by the NHS, run over 7 years, demonstrate a 36% reduction in late-stage diagnosis of cancer, and peer-reviewed in an excellent journal at the beginning of the summer, the European Respiratory Journal. The technology and team at the forefront, ONCIMMUNE's technology and team are very much at the forefront of the autoantibody field. We continue to push the boundaries, and this is exemplified by the President's Podium presentation that we hosted at ASCO at the beginning of the summer, where we demonstrated in melanoma that we were able to successfully stratify patients into those that would respond positively to a treatment and those that are going to go on to get immune-related adverse events, side effects to that treatment. This is absolutely the holy grail at the moment in immune oncology. And as a company, we are sat at the center of that discussion. And then finally, as I've mentioned, and I'll come on to again in a moment, the data that we have in the biobank that we have today, underpinning, underwriting in many ways, the investment that is made into this company tomorrow will be exploited to its full potential. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. So a little bit on the science. On the left-hand side, you can see a very simplistic view of our immune response. It has two axes, a T cell axis and a B cell axis. And we're hearing a lot more about this at the moment in the context of the COVID response. But certainly in cancer, the T cell axis on the left-hand side of this diagram is the one that has been exploited substantially over the last 2 decades by pharmaceutical customers. And that today represents an $80 billion market on an annual basis for immune oncology drugs. On the right-hand side is the B cell axis, and this has been lesser explored, lesser understood by industry and research organizations. But over the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years has become increasingly attractive and exciting. And we've been in that space. We've really understood that space, albeit there's much more to understand over the last 20 years, ahead of the curve in many ways. Whether it's a product or service, it's always a drop of blood, literally a finger prick of blood that we use in order to detect autoantibodies through these autoantigens or immunogenic proteins that we have in our library that I'll come on to describe in a second. And it's the early CDT products that utilize this technology, or the Immune Insights service that utilizes the tools built off this technology that we use to commercialize the platform that we've developed. So this is the proprietary funnel that takes us from immunogenic proteins, these autoantigens, all the way through to a service offering and eventually a product. We have over 8,000 immunogenic proteins, different immunogenic proteins in our library. In essence, a bank of freezers with small vials and small quantities of protein in those vials that comes from a number of different sources, but is very relevant to autoimmune disease, very relevant to immuno-oncology, and very relevant to infectious diseases, 3 disease classes that are amenable to immune modulating drugs. In the first instance, to answer a question that a pharma customer puts in front of us or to develop a product, we have to long list. We go from 8,000 down to 1,500 of these assets. And then we further shortlist that long list through the development of a Navigate panel. A Navigate panel is a tool. It's not a regulated diagnostic, but it's a research tool that we use in our own laboratory, and we monetize through a service rather than selling as a product. We have a number of Navigate tools in oncology. We have a number of them in autoimmune disease. And we are now starting to branch out into infectious diseases from the British government. On top of that, and once we've used these Navigate tools to identify a signal in a set of samples, we would want to understand whether that signal can be productized. And in order to do that, we have developed a set of proprietary bioinformatics tools, data science tools. Indeed, about 17 or 18% of our headcount are data scientists in this company. And the resource they use to develop these tools is the biobank and data resource that underpins our ability to do these analyses. If there is a signal that can be productized, of course, we have the heritage, the knowledge, the competency, and the capacity to be able to productize that signal. And typically, commercially viable panels range from 8 to 12 autoantigens from the 8,000 that we started with. So I've mentioned this data asset a couple of times, and I want to just explain it a little better to you. Over the last 17 years, of course, we have been collecting data for research purposes, but more importantly, since the launch of our first test in 2012, we have been collecting samples from patients. 305,000 tests we've delivered over that period of time. About 160,000 of those have been on a commercial basis. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, what you can see is that we have 166,000 samples in our biobank that have a small amount of contextual information associated with them: age, gender, and risk. 57-year-old female who smoked 20 pack years. It is the sort of data that we have related to that sample set. It's a very large sample set, for a diagnostic company of our size, and has some limited value and importance. But critically, on the right-hand side of this diagram, we have fewer samples, granted, but fewer samples that are entirely linked to the clinical context. The 12,208 samples from the ETLS study there, for example, are linked through a unique identifier to clinical records, to prison records, to police records on an individual patient with the appropriate ethical approval. Now, in the past, we have simply seen this data asset as underpinning or protecting the downside of any investment that's made into this company. We have used it to inform the development of our bioinformatics tools and used it to inform the development of our Navigate products. But from tomorrow, we will be using this asset to discover, develop, and productize hand in hand with pharmaceutical companies diagnostic devices and tools that they wish to use in order to drive the adoption and better understand the impact of their assets. We don't have a clinical deal today where a pharma company is gaining access to and using those samples, but in the not too distant future, we absolutely will have those sorts of deals on the table. So what is the opportunity space? I'm going to focus on product to start with. We all know that 1 in 2 of us is likely over our lifetime to develop cancer, and we all are aware that the earlier we detect the disease, the more likely we are to survive it. But few of us will appreciate that maybe 2 million people this year will develop and be diagnosed with lung cancer globally. And maybe 100 times that number, about 200 million people are at risk of developing lung cancer and therefore amenable to the sorts of diagnostic that we've developed in that space. We've launched a liver test, and we have ovarian, prostate and breast tests that are really only a couple of months away from launch should we find an appropriate partner to take them to market. That gives you a sense of the very large market opportunity for our early detection products. But on the immunoinsights side of the business, our pharma services side of the business, we think about the opportunity space in quite a different way. We are focused on 3 disease types: oncology, autoimmune disease, and latterly infectious diseases. And in each one of those disease types, there are a number of clinical trials being run. In the case of oncology, it's about 6,000 this year, autoimmune about 1,600 this year. And in the case of infectious diseases, bolstered no doubt by COVID, there's about 5,000 clinical trials that are going to be developed and delivered this year. In each trial, there are tens, hundreds, if not thousands of patients, and the minimum number of samples that each one of these trials creates per patient is 2, which gives you a sense of the market opportunity that we currently face, and the fact that that opportunity certainly outstrips any capacity that we have today. So who's interested in this? Well, there are really 2 types of organization interested, either because we're competitive or because we're highly complementary. In the case of the diagnostics industry, there are a number of companies that are focused on early detection. But what's critical to understand is that our assets, as they're proprietary, no one else has developed early detection technology for cancer using autoantibody biomarkers. It means that our panels are highly complementary to other people's panels. In fact, we boost their performance. It's a bit like supercharging someone else's diagnostic performance. And that's the sort of thing that we're able to do, with the added benefit that this biomarker picks up disease earlier than every other biomarker, and so has a substantial amount of inherent value. Therapeutic companies are also interested in what we do and how we do it, as you are well aware, through our pharma services business, and they are more interested in being able to understand why patients respond in the way that they respond to certain forms of immune modulating drug. Sure. Pick the right patients for a trial, those that are more likely to respond positively to a drug and less likely to have the side effect profile that unfortunately loses patients to follow up for a trial. But eventually to support the market launch and access of a very expensive therapeutic that may work very well in a certain population, but less well in another another population. And across that vista, we're able to support them with the development of either a tool or a diagnostic once that tool has demonstrated some degree of utility. So let me explain how we make money from this science and the technology platform that we developed. At the top of this diagram, you have the product business, and at the bottom, our service business. And I think everyone will understand, without very much explanation, the way in which we monetize our product business. We go to market either directly, indirectly through distributors, or in some markets, China, Russia, Russia, and the US. For example, we have a strategic relationship. In every single one of those cases, we are looking to set an in-market selling price and then share in the in-market, the achieved in-market selling price. At one end of the spectrum, we may be sharing through a royalty paid to us, as well as having an exclusive supply agreement with that strategic partner. And at the other end of the spectrum, we are setting an in-market selling price for a distributor, and then we're selling our product to them for onward sale into the market. The Immune Insights business has quite a different business model. There are two stages to the way in which we derive value from our technology platform. In the first instance, we very much get our foot in the door. We get our foot in the door by offering up a pilot project to a pharmaceutical company so they can understand the value add that we're able to create. But lock into that contract an option to extend the pilot across not just 100, 150 or 200 samples, but 1,000, 1,500 or 2,000 samples. And in a number of cases, we've seen that option being exercised. And of course, we have announced that to the market over the last couple of months. However, our intent isn't just to drive revenue. Our intent here is to build something of value, derive some insight from our analysis that we can then go and hook ourselves into as we continue to support that pharma company in making critical decisions. That insight often is an immune signature, something we've spotted that is very highly tailored or specific to their drug in this patient population. If that is deemed valuable, a drug company will be making use of it in a number of different ways. They may be making $1 billion drug development decision off the back of it. They may simply be confirming a decision that they've already made. Either way, we look to understand what value add that insight can bring to the decision-making process and look for opportunities to productize that value add and continue to support the pharmaceutical company as they develop that asset and hopefully launch that asset in the future. Ultimately, we hope that these assets are able to be used as companion diagnostics. Now, that commercial engagement is quite different to the per sample or time and materials engagement that we have through the Pilot and Pilot Plus projects. That commercial engagement often involves a royalty or a license. It often involves a time and materials engagement to support development and technical services, and it often involves an exclusive supply agreement, as we have in some of the product sales into certain geographies through strategic partners. Here is that explained through a case study. On the top in the blue box, you can see the 5 business development steps that I've already described, the Pilot, Pilot Plus steps that we're currently engaged with with a number of pharmaceutical companies. And then on the right-hand side, the panel definition and the productization, and importantly, the commercial supply of product into a pharmaceutical company. So what's next? Well, certainly on the ImmunoInsights part of our business, we're going to see more partners added to our stable of existing partners with in-flight projects. That's for sure, over the coming quarters. In addition, I'm very confident that we are going to be able to upsell those existing relationships within our stable of current projects. And as I described, hook ourselves into value, the value that we've created or the value that we're adding to the drug development process. Equally, and primarily through the COVID work that we're now delivering on behalf of the British government, I expect that we will be able to further diversify revenue. We won't just be selling that into the pharmaceutical industry, but also to academia, as we've demonstrated with the Cedars-Sinai announcement we made very recently, but also regulators as they start to consider what assets can be deployed to successfully quench the second, third, maybe fourth wave of COVID as and when we get there. On the product side of our business, our early CDT business, again, there is lots of news flow to come in the next couple of months. Firstly, I'm sure we'll see a publication of the early CDT lung health economic assessment in screening or case selection. And now that the 3-year follow-up data is available on early CDT lung, I expect that that will be presented and then published in the not too distant future. That's important data because we're confident it's going to be able to tell us something about the survival benefit that we can attribute to this diagnostic. The first time ever, I think, that we'll have been able to say something about survival with a diagnostic rather than a therapeutic. Equally, we are now in the final throes of locking down the cancer control evaluation for early CDT lung and currently looking at funding options for that very significant program, which we hope to be able to run up in Scotland with the same investigators that undertook ECLS. And finally, there are a number of health technology assessments that are either in flight or due to be announced, which will further underpin and support market access of the product in a number of different geographies. So finally, I'm going to leave you with this slide and hand back to Paul for
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions via the Q&A tab on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the management take a few moments to review the questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations, and we would very much encourage you to do that. Adam, you may have noticed that Matthew's camera went off. I think there's a small dropout with his broadband, but he's now dialed in and is with us on the call. Matthew, are you there?
Let me just test that.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Matthew. So as investors had the ability to pre-submit questions, we had a couple that were pre-submitted. What I'd like to do is if I could start with those and then ask you to look at the Q&A tab from the questions that are coming during the live event. The first question that we had is congratulations on the operational progress made at ONC. I'm amazed that the market has yet not attributed much more value, but I'm sure that will come. As an investor, it's difficult to work out cash burn as we don't know the financial details from recent contracts or what the capital outlay has required to take them forward. The trading update on the 4th of June, we were guided to expect cash at year end to be approximately 4.2 million and net debt of approximately 3.1 million. Is that still the case? And then follows on with from the half-year report, it says that the company has a fully drawn credit facilities of 8.5 million with IPF Management SA. Is that facility still outstanding, or has it been partly paid down?
Thank you very much, Paul. Adam, I may just take that question. Yeah, good. Yes, well, indeed. The guidance on the 4th of June of 4.3 million of cash and 3 million net debt was exactly right. The 8.5 million euros of the IPF facility was fully drawn and indeed remains in place. And just to remind everyone, that facility and each tranche of that facility is interest only for the first 12 months before capital repayments commence. In fact, we made our first capital repayment on the first tranche of that debt on the 30th of September. And we also announced, if you recall, a little earlier on, in addition to that tranche, that tranche has exactly the same terms, 12 months interest only before principal repayments. We, as I said, we expected to access those funds in order to be able to place additional funds on our balance sheet to support the outsourced due diligence, which we are increasingly going through with our pharmaceutical customers. And I think another part of that question was the difficulty in getting a handle on the regular monthly burn of the business, and indeed in capital expenditure. Just touching on the capital expenditure for a moment, this business is very well resourced, and we spend very little on capital expenditure. We recently spent some money in our Dortmund facility, anticipating the demand that was coming through in that facility. We anticipated that and put some modest amount of capital expenditure, which has made a significant increase in the capabilities of that business. This is not, either side of the business, this is not a heavily demanding CapEx business in any way, shape or form. And lastly, in terms of cash burn, I guess I might just direct you to the analyst reports, which will give you a very good sense of our historic and forecast expenditure. But if I were to just summarize those two, they are looking at a combined cost of around about or a bit under 6 million a year, which is 500,000 a month. And we continue to look for cost savings and drive that monthly cost lower. So, Paul, I'll hand back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. The second question is, when can we expect news from early CDT lung in Russia and China? Has there been delays due to COVID?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and maybe I'll take that. There have been delays in the delivery of diagnostics and indeed healthcare services outside of the COVID response, not just in the UK, US and Europe, but also in Russia and China, as you might imagine. However, I'm delighted to say that those delays have not had a material impact on the timelines that we previously published around the registration of early CDT lung in Russia and the registration through the NMPA of early CDT lung and indeed liver in China. Both of those registration processes are, however, dependent upon small clinical trials, local validation trials, if you like, which have had minor delays incurred as a result of being unable to find the samples required to support those trials. We are, however, hopeful that we'll be able to make up those delays in the latter parts of the program.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I just therefore just ask you to just select the Q&A tab, Adam, on the right-hand side. If I could ask you to read out the question, of course, because no one can see anyone else's questions, and where appropriate, if you could give an answer, that'd be fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And so we have a question here. Can you give some detail on how you are working with your major pharma partners and the monetization of those relationships? And hopefully I've been able to provide a detailed explanation of that. But just to provide a quick summary once again, we have five contracts in flight at the moment, and more that are rapidly progressing up the hopper. Of those 5 contracts, we are engaged in the pilot and pilot plus contracts, the per sample or time and materials engagement that I described. And in a handful of those relationships, we are now getting to a point where there is some signal that we would like to consider productizing, and those conversations have just started with a couple of those partners. The next question is where are you in terms of your 3-year strategic plan to create shareholder value, and are you on track to deliver this, or has COVID impacted that plan Thank you for asking that question. We launched that plan in November 2018. So we are approaching the 2-year point. The results that we presented today are the first full trading year in that plan. And what we have seen is over the last 6 to 9 months, once the initial work had been completed in the delivery of that plan, a substantial amount of growth. I described there being 3 phases to that plan. The first, the lag phase. There was some reorganization that needed to be done. There was some new people that needed to be put in place. There were new relationships that needed to be established. That turnaround exercise we completed very quickly, and it probably terminated at the point at which we acquired and integrated the German business in March of last calendar year. The second phase, the log phase, very much is about creating optionality, and we are seeing a significant amount of optionality created at the moment. There are lots of shots on goal now with this business. Every single one of them has the potential to drive substantial revenue, but more importantly, builds substantial strategic value for a company such as ours. And the final stage is the linear phase. We are absolutely entering into that phase today. And haven't been knocked sideways by COVID at all. And that linear phase sees us start to really demonstrate the growth potential of the platform technology that we've developed. It's a shame often as I report out these results on an annual basis that we're looking back at a 12-month period that ended 6 months ago. Because of course in a fast-growing company such as this, the results might look quite different if we were to be reporting out data from today. The final question here, sorry, there's 2 more questions, is what do you see as the greatest risk to ONCIMMUNE? Well, I think the greatest risk to ONCIMMUNE probably is the risk of a strategic partner feeling that they needed to own the company. We've been transparent from the outset that we developed a strategy with three limbs. The first, to exploit the full potential of our platform through further productization rather than having a single product in the market. The second, to develop a pharma services offering to support drug companies in better understanding the patients that they have on their clinical trials. And the final is to be a good partner, hold hands with others. We're a small company on a small island in the middle of the Atlantic, and we play in the global life sciences space. So we need to be a good partner. But there are advantages to being a good partner. And not only do you win more work, more repeat work, and are able to upsell and cross-sell that work, but you also get to know, and they get to know you, potential acquirers. So I would see that as being the greatest threat to us continuing to drive growth in this business. And then maybe the final question I have here, unless there's any others, I know a couple more have come in, so maybe this isn't the final one, but one for you, Matthew. Does the IPF facility have additional equity-related returns?
Well, the IPF facility does have a warrant attached to it, if that is what you're driving at. We announced that at IPF when we announced the facility in the first place. So there is a warrant attached to the facility as well.
Excellent, thank you, Matthew. And then maybe one final question. Could you please elaborate on your remarks on slide 18 on obtaining 3-year data on recovery performance based on diagnostics rather than on therapeutics? Yes, absolutely. So when we undertook the ECLS study, the primary outcome in that study was to demonstrate that we could reduce the number of late-stage diagnoses. As I described, and you'll all be aware, that late-stage diagnoses are typically related with worse outcomes than early-stage diagnoses of the disease. And so by reducing late-stage diagnoses by 36%, we saw an increase in early-stage diagnoses by a similar a similar amount. That's what the industry would call a stage shift in diagnosis. Now, as a clinician, introspectively, we know a stage shift leads to better survival, but we didn't have the evidence to demonstrate that at 2 years because the study wasn't powered to demonstrate that at 2 years. However, it is a secondary outcome. And because there's divergence in the control and early CDT arms of the study with regards to mortality and survival, we anticipate that if that divergence continues at 3 years, we might be able to say something statistically significant at that point. The importance here is that there isn't another diagnostic that has gone and developed so much evidence of such high quality supporting claims around not only stage shift, but hopefully survival. That tends to be the reserve of therapeutics, but diagnostics rarely, if ever, are able to get to that stage. So I think that's it. I don't think there are any other questions that we haven't already answered. So maybe I'll hand back to you, Paul.
That's very kind. Thank you very much indeed. I guess perhaps, obviously, if any questions do come through, obviously we can always review them post the event if they are coming through as we speak. Perhaps I could just ask you to wrap up, and I know investor feedback is important, and obviously post that we will redirect investors to provide you feedback. So Adam, if I could just hand back to you to wrap up, and then I will redirect.
Thank you very much. I would like to leave you with the final slide up in front of you, which is very much why we believe ONCIMMUNE is differentiated. We are leaders in immune biomarkers in this particular class of immune biomarker called an autoantibody, with a vision to enable personalized, data-driven clinical decisions across the cancer care continuum. That is a differentiated position for a diagnostics and tools company, I can tell you. We've proven value in the global deployment of that technology. We've undertaken the largest prospective and randomized study of a blood biomarker for cancer detection in the world, partially funded by the NHS. We have a technology and a team, importantly, that is very much at the forefront of this unique and proprietary set of biomarkers, the autoantibody biomarkers. And underpinning everything that we do today is a substantial biobank and rich data resource that allows us to not only build tools and validate our own thinking, but in the future will allow pharma companies to more rapidly discover and develop and ultimately productize diagnostic companies to support their therapies in clinical trials and in the real world. Many thanks for all of your time.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's session. But if I could ask you not to close your browsers, because you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback. If you access this meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear. If you access this via the link sent you by email, you'll simply be asked to log in to submit your feedback. But once again, we do very much encourage you to provide the company your feedback. On behalf of the management team of ONCIMMUNE Holdings PLC, we'd like to thank you very much indeed for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session. Good afternoon to you all.